the Director of the program, Her Excellency Ameenah Gurib-Fakim, the President of the Republic of Mauritius, Dr. Carlos Lopez, the Executive Secretary of Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Trevor Ngubo, the Chairperson of the African Media Initiative, and all members of the board who are present here today, Mr. Eric Chinje, the Chief Executive of AMI and his executive management team, Matata Tsedu, the local organizing committee chair, media owners, journalists, distinguished guests, comrades, and friends. It is with a great honor and privilege to be invited by the board and management of Africa Media Initiative to open this 7th edition of the African Media Leadership Forum on behalf of His Excellency President Jacob Zuma and the people of South Africa. Want to welcome you all to our country and to here in Johannesburg, Jozi. The theme of this conference is about media development, shaping conversations in Africa. This is a very welcome debate by the African media leaders and the intelligentsia, since it will ensure that this fourth estate does engage meaningfully with issues of development in our beloved continent, Africa. In my short brief, I will briefly reflect on the experience of our country, South Africa, and highlight some pertinent issues that are facing our continent, and then relate our trajectory of development as a continent to the global environment. The South African context. As a country, we recently adopted our first ever National Development Plan, the NDP, and our Vision 2030, which is an embodiment of our collective development goals and aspirations as a South African society in relation to the elimination of the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. South Africa's Development Indicators Report, which we released in early September, published, has shown a mixed bag of progress in some areas and weaknesses in other areas. The National Development Plan builds on a strong foundation that has been laid over the past in relation to our quest to create a new society that is free of apartheid colonialism and its related negative political, social, and economic impacts. It is common knowledge that under the system of apartheid rule, a culture of secrecy, of disinformation, of restrictions on press freedom were a norm. Journalists were subjected to harassment, and some newspapers were closed down. As we gather here today, I have a sense of déjà vu as I remember an occasion way back in 1991 whereby the newly unbanned liberation movement, the African National Congress, convened a meeting of approximately 300 delegates to discuss the drafting of media policy and led to the adoption of the Media Charter, which still remains our policy as an organization, as the ruling party of the government of South Africa. That charter broadened the debate and addressed issues like basic human rights and media freedom, democratization of the media, the relationship between those working in media and society, media education and training, and proactive measures to promote diversity in our society that we were envisaging then. Policy documents and subsequent multi-party negotiations laid a basis for the current constitution of the Republic of South Africa that we adopted in 1996, whose Section 16 guarantees freedom of the press and other media, freedom to receive and impart information or ideas. Furthermore, in Section 32 of our Bill of Rights, our Constitution guarantees access to any information held by the state and any information that is held by another person and that is required for the exercise or protection of any rights. Our well-known statute, called the Promotion of Access to Information Act, has been used effectively by journalists and other persons to defend this right over the years. By guaranteeing access to information, we believe in South Africa that we have opened doors for the implementation of other rights that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, including other similar international obligations that we subscribe to. Through our legal framework, we value human rights, transparency, accountability, equality, justice, good governance, and democracy. Recently, His Excellency President Jacob Zuma delivered the Percy Qoboza Memorial Lecture, where he declared, and I want to quote, "Never again will our nation witness the harassment of the free media such as occurred on that Wednesday in October 1977, when the apartheid regime clamped down on the media, banning 2 newspapers, The World and the Weekend World, and arresting the editor and other brave journalists who stood up to the regime." This reminder and the clarion call by our president seeks to ensure that as a new constitutional democracy, we cherish these freedoms and ideals, and will also ensure that they inform our outlook in terms of engaging with other nations across the globe on matters of democracy, matters of development. With freedom comes obligations. The development imperative that is on the agenda of this meeting is one of those obligations that media owners and practitioners should always take into consideration when exercising your craft. Since 1994, as a democratic government, we've seen media as a partner and as a powerful independent agent for social change. It is the inherent role of the media to inform, to educate and entertain anyone, not just the selected minority. This helps empower people to form their own views and opinions and become active citizens who are able to use that information to engage meaningfully on matters of development that affect them on a daily basis. But most importantly, the media builds and helps to build active citizenry that is able to hold powerful actors in society to account, including the private and public sector leaderships and organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, in South Africa, we have made significant progress in terms of media transformation, which is part of the broader developmental agenda to eradicate the legacy left by apartheid. But there's still much to be done, since, for instance, print media ownership patterns remain largely untransformed, and alternative voices, more especially of the poor and the most disadvantaged of society, still remain largely unheard in the media environment. That is why we champion community media to help fill this gap at a grassroots level. Our National Development Plan invites all of us to build a capable developmental state that is underpinned by active citizenry. And I strongly believe that media can play a pivotal role in terms of achieving this development agenda. The African context. Our country, South Africa, does not exist in a vacuum. We are part and parcel of this great African continent. We have committed our country to contribute towards the creation of a better South Africa, a better and safer Africa in a better world. And from a media perspective, the South African government supports and is signatory to many international instruments, protocols, and charters, such as the African Charter on People and Human Rights, the Windhoek Declaration, the Johannesburg Principles, the SADC Protocol, the African Charter on Broadcasting, the Access to Airwaves Principles, the Dhaka Declaration, the Declaration on the Principles of Freedom and Expression in Africa, amongst others. All these instruments create that enabling environment for all of us to build strong media that contributes to social, cultural, political, and economic development and emancipation of our people. Therefore, let us take advantage of this splendid opportunity today to make a difference in our lifetime. This conference occurs at a time when human development indicators are beginning to show significant shifts in relation to the trajectory of African development, as the latest African Development Indicators report recognizes the positive impact of the policies that have been adopted by various African governments, as well as better informed citizens. That report notes the following positive trends, amongst others: that Africa has experienced rapid economic growth at an average rate of 5% over the past decade against global challenges. That more than 80% of Africans have now access to mobile phones, a trend that is now characterized as an information technology revolution. For the first time in history, poverty has been declining, with an absolute number of people living under $1.25 per day falling by a staggering 9 million Africans. And this is a good story to tell about this beloved African continent. And our collective task as leaders, as media leaders gathered here as well, is to ensure that these positive trends are sustained and the fruits of this development are experienced by all of Africa's people. The remaining challenges of conflict, malnutrition, pandemics, illiteracy, unemployment, environmental hazards, and gross inequalities should be eradicated where they still persist. Distinguished guests, in January of this year, our heads of states and governments of the African Union assembled in Addis Ababa during the 24th ordinary session of the Assembly of the Union, adopted Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 is a long-term vision and a firm commitment of Africans themselves to achieve the aspirations of a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, integrated Africa, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. An Africa of good governance, of democracy, of respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. And a peaceful Africa, an Africa with strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. An Africa where development is people-driven, unleashing the greatest potential of its women and youth. Africa that is strong, united, and an influential global player and partner. This Agenda 2063 is aligned to the emerging global consensus regarding the shift from the Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals. We believe that media will be very instrumental in ensuring that as Africans, we are well informed of the steps that are required to implement in order to achieve these developmental aspirations and goals of Africa's people. It should provide platforms for the battle of ideas, and all sectors of societies within the African countries should strive to make that 50-year vision of the Africa we want a reality by implementing practical programs, strategies, and social compacts that will take us gradually towards the attainment of those goals in 2063. We can achieve this if we work together as stakeholders in Africa's society. Media holds that key since its core business is about information, it's about knowledge dissemination. It should play its watchdog role without fear, without favor, without prejudice. Media should defend the development progress that has been made thus far and challenge governments, civil society, and the private sector to always act in a manner that puts our people first and contributes meaningfully towards socio-economic development. This should be done in a manner that is genuinely participatory, that is rights-based and respectful of the diversity of views and voices in society. Media should be that voice of the voiceless, indeed. In conclusion, as we're all gathered here in Johannesburg, do remember that this is the very same place where gatherings like these would not have been permitted under apartheid rule just about more than 20 years ago. We owe this freedom, we owe this democracy to the militancy of the media practitioners and leaders from across the globe, the sacrifices of our fellow African brothers and sisters in Africa and the diaspora, and all peoples of the world who actively stood up against apartheid chauvinism. The struggle for emancipation of the poor in Africa and globally from the chains of poverty and underdevelopment is a long-term journey that we should all embark on with more vigor, solidarity, and determination. We dare not let down our people at a time when they expect more from us in terms of information and provision of better education, better health, skills, employment, housing, water, governance, social protection, and eradication of poverty. We should produce information and develop measures that will make all peoples of Africa to face socio-economic risk and environmental hazards with greater preparedness, with greater resilience, better informed by our media platforms who play a key role in terms of early warning and proper response mechanisms. The new ICT revolution in Africa brings about new opportunities for media to reach the previously marginalized groups and present as well innovative solutions in terms of empowering our citizens in the continent to determine their own development and livelihoods. We want to echo the voices of our current African leaders when they call on us into action through Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, with a vision of an integrated, peaceful and prosperous Africa driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in this global arena. Again, we'd like to congratulate the organizers of this event for being bold and visionary in terms of creating a space to engage on this powerful theme of media and development, shaping conversation in Africa, which challenges media leaders to question the place, the role of media owners, of journalists, rights activists, and industry experts in the social, political, and economic development of Africa. With those few words, I would like to welcome you all on the 7th edition of the African Media Leaders Forum here in Jozi, in Gauteng. Karibuni nyumbani ya Afrika Kusini. Thank you very much.
President, may I invite you to come onto the stage? This is my first opportunity not to use my whistle but my voice. It's a great pleasure. A round of applause, if you would.
Excellencies, members of the media, citizen journalists and bloggers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure to be back in South Africa and an immense privilege to address this 7th Africa Media Leaders Forum, Amlf. I congratulate Amlf and the African Media Initiative on the choice of the venue for this high-level meeting. That is because South Africa occupies a unique position in the African imagination and ethos. South Africa's political transition from a reviled apartheid state to a beacon of democracy is a remarkable story and a continuing source of inspiration for all Africans and the world. As South Africa's evolution shows, the path to democracy can be rocky, but it is reassuring to recall how South Africans have demonstrated the truth and reconciliation can go hand in hand, and how some of the deepest scars of the past can be erased. Through generosity of spirit, South Africans have also shown how adversity and racial division can be overcome with compassion, determination, and empathy, for allowing for greater fulfillment of the human potential. The recent discovery of Homo naledi in the Rising Star Caves, not far from the venue of this forum, has added a completely new dimension to our understanding of our origins and evolution, while once again underscoring the centrality of South Africa in human affairs. When Eric Chinji asked me to address this forum, I accepted this invitation with trepidation. As the newly elected president of Mauritius, former business entrepreneur, and a lifelong scientist, I pondered over what new insights could I share with the African continent media leaders and thus add value to the deliberation of this forum. After all, I am more at home in the quietude of medicinal plants than in the frenzied 24/7 world of the media headlines, bylines, and deadlines. Well, Eric was his usual persuasive self and quickly dispelled any residual doubts by convincing me that the overarching purpose of this forum is to shape conversation about development in Africa and chart a new, more hopeful narrative about the African continent. So here I am, trying to address in that process. I fully appreciate the opportunity to address this distinguished forum, and to set the context for my remark, I would like to begin by describing the current development landscape. Since the forum is looking at media in a digital environment, I will outline the profound nature of the ICT revolution and its potential, and conclude by highlighting the common areas where science and media intersect, and how they can be natural allies for achieving the common good and purpose. Seen against this backdrop, the time is opportune to ask several key questions. What role African media can play in shaping evidence-based conversation about development? At a time of rapid transformation, how can a more positive and hopeful narrative emerge? Are African media up to the mark by creating the space for participatory citizenship to take hold and drive the conversation needed to sustain Africa's positive trends? Finally, I would like to use my pulpit to call for a more hopeful, people and development-centered narrative that can be embraced by all Africans. Ladies and gentlemen, we meet at a consequential time in Africa's evolution. Africa, south of the Sahara, is undergoing unprecedented economic, social, and cultural transformations. Let me begin with the good news, though. Economic growth rates are up. The World Bank projects sub-Saharan Africa's GDP growth rate to average 4.1% in 2015. Estimates show that growth will remain strong in Africa's low-income countries, which bodes well for the fight against poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and disease, as well as the effects of climate change and environmental imperatives. A commodities boom, improved governance, sound macroeconomic fundamentals, commitment to reform, and new resource discoveries have all contributed to this robust growth trend, helping to reverse 20 years of economic decline. Africa is also making progress in education and health. But between 2008 and 2008, secondary school enrollment increased by 50% and life expectancy has increased by 10%. The continent is open now for business. I was particularly pleased that Mauritius, with a global ranking of 32, was cited as the region's highest-ranked economy in terms of ease of doing business. As we all know, Ebola has dominated the headlines and exacted a heavy toll in human suffering on the populations of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Economic losses alone from the Ebola crisis are expected to top 30 billion with far-reaching impacts, and I think this is where ECA will have some discussions with the World Bank. And there is good news for West Africa. And last week, Sierra Leone has also declared Ebola-free. These welcome trends have to be seen against the backdrop of sobering facts, making the proverbial glass half full. Changes in demography, high population growth rates, rapid urbanization, slumping commodity prices are all posing major challenges threatening to reverse hard-won development gains. I would be remiss if I did not address climate change and the fundamental threat it poses to balanced development in sub-Saharan Africa. Food production in sub-Saharan Africa will need to increase by 60% over the next 15 years, and yet the agriculture sector will be hit hardest. Without adaptation, Africa will suffer severe yield declines in important food-growing areas. Extreme weather events are increasing in frequency as well as in intensity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is only a fleeting snapshot of the major challenges facing our continent. There are more. As a scientist, I lament that sub-Saharan Africa, with 12% of the global population, only accounts for less than 1% of the world's research output, and that no African nation was among the top 20 countries filing for patent application in 2013. Let me now turn briefly to the information and communication technology revolution underway and the portent it holds for sustainable development of the African continent. One of the dominating features of the 21st century is the remarkable growth and ubiquity of global communications affecting all facets of human endeavor. Today, we take instantaneous communications for granted. The rapid rise of social media has been breathtaking, with Facebook ready to enter the history books as the largest country of netizens, numbering over 1 billion and counting. New ICT technologies have led to the new development field of bioinformatics and genomics, a development that was instrumental in the decoding of the human genome. According to McKinsey Global Institute report, Big Data, the next frontier for innovation, competition, and productivity in 2010, people stored enough data to fill 60,000 libraries of Congress. YouTube uploads more than 24 hours of video every minute. The world's 4 billion users of mobile phones, 12% of whom own smartphones, have turned themselves into data streams. The World Bank's next World Development Report will focus on the theme, digital dividends. Some of its early findings, there are 4.2 billion Google searches every day and 6,000 tweets go out every second. Success stories abound. From Kenya's M-Pesa to Senegal's Sonatel and Mali's Icon telemedicine program, we are witnessing remarkable strides African countries are making in mobilizing ICT for national development, improving governance, boosting accountability, and positively impacting people's lives. And yet, we are to see the full contours of the Internet of Things that is fast emerging, linking devices, people, and data in ways unthinkable a few years ago. The surge in communication capability is unprecedented in human history. Our collective challenge now is to mold these tremendous forces and bring them to bear on the common everyday problems facing Africans. What is the role of science and media? The famous mathematician and scientist, late Alfred North Whitehead, said, and I quote, "The aims of scientific thought are to see the general in the particular and the eternal in the transitory," unquote. The key words about seeing the general in the particular and the eternal in the transitory. Like science, media can be a powerful force for the common good. The ability to search for truth based on evidence is a fundamental aspect of journalism. Discerning trends, locating stories in their local context, connecting the dots, speaking truth to power without fear of retribution, these are all about seeing the general in the particular. Similarly, development is about people. The fact is eternal. So if we were to take us back to the future, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have painted a broad canvas. So to conclude, let me take recourse to the writings of Rabindranath Tagore, India's famous literary giant, poet, and Nobel laureate, who described the quest for a promised land in his magisterial poem, Gitanjali, and I quote, "Where the mind is held without fear, and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm around perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led into ever-widening thought and action, into the heaven of freedom, let my country awake," unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that science and the practice of journalism, supported by a new, more hopeful, Africa-centric narrative, can help propel us forward in the journey to our promised land. Both science and journalism can play an important role in Africa's transformation by paving the way with words that draw the strength from truth, where the search for perfection and quality reporting is never-ending, and where evidence is used to strengthen stories, influence policies, and backstop our research endeavors, whether at the news desk, in laboratories, or classrooms. Like science, the best of journalism can only arise when it is practiced without fear or retribution. Good journalism is a barometer of society. It can shine the light of scrutiny on Africa's effort to achieve sustainable development, showcasing development successes and pinpointing failures so that we can learn from them, adapt, and innovate. Done right, journalism with a social purpose and geared towards the common good can help transform our economies, spur innovation in newsroom and laboratories, improve our economic and social prospects, and help the continent to thrive so that all Africans can dream of better tomorrows. It will also help media owners to meet corporate objectives and make a profit. So what will it take to craft a more hopeful, Africa-centric narrative? To media owners, I urge you to invest in your journalists. They are the future of the news business. By building journalism capacity, you will unleash talent, build human capability, and lay the foundations for viable business and deliver profits. Africa needs a cadre of young people brimming with ideas and zeal, with storytelling skills, who choose media and journalism not for the glamour it holds, but for its potential to nurture development and positively impact society. Why is it important to track the youth? Let me start an example from the world of science. By the age of 23, Isaac Newton had made 3 of the greatest discoveries in science: the differential calculus, the composition of light, and the laws of gravitation. And this, when in the summer of 1665, his academic base in Cambridge had to be evacuated on account of the plague. To journalists, both current and aspiring, I implore you to focus your reporting skills on promoting sustainable development in Africa. There are scores of human interest stories waiting to be told. Every day, people who are beating the odds and making improvement in the lives of their families. The development challenges confronting Africa far surpass the capability of any one country to tackle them alone. African journalists can and must become the voice of change. And help the continent to become a producer and not just a consumer of knowledge. It is said the media cannot help us to think, but the media can stunningly successful in telling us what to think about. Here, the agenda-setting function of the media can serve media owners and journalists alike. African media owners and practitioners must be active, not passive, in tackling development topics, generating local solutions, while nurturing citizen engagement and development debate. We must all become activists, not pacifists, in the search for Africa-centric development solutions that are economically viable, socially relevant, and environmentally benign. Increasing the role of women in media also is key. Next month, the international community will gather in Paris for the 21st meeting of the Convention for Parties to discuss climate change. I will have the privilege of leading my country's delegation and making the case for the extreme vulnerability that a changing climate poses to the well-being of small island developing states. Africa's voice must be heard loudly, and media have a central role to play in articulating position and enabling Africans' voices to be heard. Mobilizing cutting-edge knowledge and forging partnership anchored in the common good for the benefit of all must become our guiding mantra. And we must dare to dream and bend technology for a social purpose. How can we increase development content in African media? And will the mobile-friendly design for a small screen? Perceptions of Africa have changed dramatically over the past 20 years. Frequently viewed as a continent of war, famines, and entrenched poverty in the late 1990s, there is now a focus on Africa Rising and Africa in the 21st century. Let us arrest this momentum and craft a positive and hopeful narrative and bend it for a social purpose. In September 2015, world leaders adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and helped set a bold new development agenda for the next 15 years. I believe now is the time to rededicate ourselves to achieving these goals by 2030. Africa media have a role, a significant one, to play in achieving these goals. And because sustainable development takes time, we cannot afford to fail yet one generation. In the words of President Obama, our actions must be guided by the fierce urgency of now. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, let me say unequivocally that media matter, both in the development and for societal advance. Let the 7th edition of the AMLF become the launch pad for new ideas, new momentum, and a new narrative that takes us forward towards greater transparency, more effective government and governance, and more engaged citizens. Let us all strive to put the D of development firmly back in the media. In doing so, we would also have furthered the cause of media development, and as Kofi Annan has said, and I quote, Africa is on its way to becoming a preferred investment destination, a potential pole of global growth, and a place of immense innovation and creativity. But there is also a long way to go, and Africa's government must, as a matter of urgency, turn their attention to those who are being left behind. I believe Africa and its leaders can rise to this challenge. If they do, Africa will become prosperous, stable, and equitable. So our time for action is now. With these words, I would like to reiterate my thanks and appreciation to AMLF and the Africa Media Initiative for the invitation. I wish you well and success in the deliberation. I thank you for your attention and have the pleasure to declare this forum open.